Well, good morning, everybody. Great to lift our voices together this morning in worship. What a wonderful time that was. If we have not met, I'm Dan. I'm one of the guys on the staff here at PCC, and it's a privilege to bring God's Word to you this morning. As we noted earlier, that this is the week of Thanksgiving, and so we come into His courts with praise. We want to come with thanksgiving. But I was reflecting on this as Mark asked me to, chat with you this morning about something that was going on in my life around this idea of giving thanks, and I began to realize, typically I'm not all that thankful. And most of the people I come in contact with tend to not be all that thankful either. It's not a natural response in the world that we seem to live in today. In fact, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine just a few weeks ago, and he was telling me about how he serves on a charitable foundation down in Southern California, and he's on the board, and the chairman of the board was, he had actually undermined my friend's authority in a position that he had with the board. And that did not settle well with my friend. In fact, he took offense to it, and so he happens to be a lawyer, so he did some research, and he found out something about the chairman of the board, and at the next board meeting, he openly shared this information about how he was handling a certain transaction for the foundation, and the other board members did not know about it. And so at the end of that meeting, the chairman of the board was not only no longer an officer, he was no longer a member of the board of directors for that foundation. And what my friend said, Dan, when it comes to revenge, I don't get even, I get ahead. And I thought, wow, that is the world we live in today. I was this close, can we talk about that? But, he was not in a place to really receive instruction at that point, because I realized this is the world that we live in today. We don't try to even the score, we try to win. We see this in every aspect of our lives today, where there might have been a notion at some time in culture where we just wanted to make things right. Now we want to get back. This idea of revenge is a common practice in our world today. In fact, it's been a common practice in our world since the very beginning of time. Cain and Abel, the first act of revenge. And then you see it later in the biblical narrative. It happens over and over and over again, like Absalom, revenge for his sister Tamar. If you know the story, you know the story. And there's so many more stories within the Bible. It says it's a common theme in Greek mythology. Revenge is a common theme. Like the goddess Demeter, who was the goddess of fertility and harvest, she was asked upon by this young woman who was the daughter of this selfish king to avenge that the king sold her off into slavery. And so Demeter sought the help of Limos, and Limos was the personality of starvation and hunger. In fact, the Greek word Limos means starvation, and basically caused the king to have a curse upon him to where he was so insatiably hungry, he ate and devoured everything, even himself, where he basically ate his arms and his legs and he died. Such a wonderful Greek tragedy. And then there's a narcissist who is inflicted by Nemesis, the goddess of revenge, by saying, oh, this man is so vain, I'm basically going to cause him to fall in love with his own image, so when he sees his reflection in the pool, he wants to hug it, and he falls in and he drowns. Who are these Greeks? But we see this all the time, even into the most common stories of modern history. Like, you've heard about the stories of the Hatfields and the McCoys, right? How the feuds just kept going on and on and on. And then, well, there's this guy. Hello, my name's Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Come on, please, tell me you guys know this one, right? I'm getting some nods of the head. Yes, okay. After the last time I was up here, I'm like, please, go watch some movies. Now, we think it's like The Princess Bride. Yes, it's a very funny thing. This idea of bringing revenge as a concept in a story that makes for a great movie plot or a storyline in a book or an anecdote. But what does this concept of revenge really mean? Well, how does revenge come about? I think it really starts with some type of an offense which breeds resentment. This idea of a bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly. That is resentment. And when you have resentment, it can easily turn to revenge, which is the act of inflicting harm or hurt on somebody else for an injury or wrong suffered at their hands. And unfortunately, this idea of seeking revenge is nothing more than an emotional response to something that's very personal. And in the end, it's hurtful at best and harmful at worst, and no one is the better for it. Books have been written. There are websites that are dedicated to stories of people who have given up their resentment and stopped seeking their revenge for the sake of being able to forgive the wrongdoer so that their mental health and their well-being can be restored. When acting on the wrongs or the hurts inflicted by others, it's best done when that action is actually expressed on behalf of others that are being wronged. And this idea is what we refer to as justice, which is the act of treating everyone equally and fairly. It's a legal term, right? We all know the symbol of justice, a blind woman holding some scales to be able to see what is fair, what is right, what is true. So when we put this action into our world, into our lives, this idea of vengeance comes about. It's different than revenge. Revenge is personal. Vengeance is for the sake of others. It's the pursuit for retribution exacted for the unfair injury or wrong on behalf of another. In fact, the word vengeance, the literal meaning of it at its core means to really buy back. We actually know this to be true because when something is done that is wrong, we say something like, well, you're going to pay for that. It is a transactional reaction to when something is wrong. We want to do something right. It's the difference between saying, when something happens that's bad, I'm going to get a gun. We all know that never ends well. But the idea of vengeance is basically to stand up and take on the offense on behalf of another. And when we see that happen in our culture, we tend to stand up and cheer. We want that to happen. In fact, we celebrate that in our culture. We dramatize it, we create fictional characters who personify it, and we call them the Avengers. Right? And I got to tell you, I got to be honest with you. I've never seen an Avenger movie ever in my life. I have not. I kind of know a little bit about who they are, but that's about as good as it gets. But I do know something about the idea of avenging. It comes from the Bible. This is what the Apostle Paul says to the church in Rome. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. And if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge. My dear friends, leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, "It is mine to avenge. I will repay," says the Lord. Now, I love that verse from the King James, right? Vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord. And I'm a pastor, so I say, yes, and I happen to work for God. Think about it. If we were to take this concept off the big screen, out of the comic books, and out of the stories of lore, and look at it from our everyday lives, it may look a little differently about how we actually feel and act towards each other. Now, I'm sure you've heard the Latin phrase quid pro quo, right? It means in exchange for in Latin, or something for something. It's a favor. That's what quid pro quo means. In other words, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. That's quid pro quo. It's very different than the English concept of tit for tat, which is actually short for this for that. Tit for tat basically says, if you do this to me, I will do this to you. And if you are a parent and you have children, you know this concept very well. When I would go pick up my 2 daughters from school, it would kind of go something like this. I'd be driving and I'd hear a slap. And then I'd hear another slap. And then I'd hear a slap. And then I hear a slap, and a slap, and a slap, and slap, slap. And all of a sudden, they're fighting back there. Like, knock it off, you two. It's very Pee Wee Herman-ish, right? You know what I'm talking about. Pee Wee is called crazy by his neighbor, Francis. And basically, he says, I know you are, but what am I? Well, you're a nerd. I know you are, but what am I? You're an idiot. I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? We go on and on and on in this childish behavior. Because when it comes to tit for tat, we might just think it's childish when somebody hits first. In other words, when we get hit first, we think that's childish. But when we hit first, we think it's because we have a reason. In terms of how we manage one another, this concept is called the fundamental attribution error. I'll explain. The fundamental attribution error is when, here's an example. You're driving down the freeway, and you're going along, and you're minding your own business, and all of a sudden, this car comes from the left lane, gets right in front of you, and slows you down so he can get onto the exit. And you think to yourself, what a jerk. I can't believe that guy just did that. That was so dangerous. And then you're in the car and you have to go to an important interview or a meeting, and you're in your head, you're thinking along the lines, and you're driving along, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, that's my exit. And then all of a sudden you've got to get in front of the guy and then get up there and you make it just in time. And you're like, I'm sorry. It's because I really had to do that. You see, the fundamental attribution error says the other person's wrong when I'm always right for doing the same thing. We fall into this behavior so much that we don't even realize it. It's because we think in terms of at times when it befits us, we want everybody else to live by the letter of the law, but when we're only allowed to live by the spirit of the law. The letter of the law, basically, if we go back to Exodus, when something is done to us, if there is a serious injury, it says in Exodus 21, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. Yeah. Some people live that way. Some people believe that way. But is that what the Lord asks of us? The Lord does this and asks of this from us. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Act justly. To really put into practice this idea of being fair for all. To love mercy. To have a heart change where we think less of retribution. We think less of you deserve that. To, even though you deserve that, I want to help. I want to love and care. I want to help you be better. And this idea of walking humbly, meaning that you don't get ahead of God, and He's not dragging you. You are in step with God, and you are allowing Him to lead you. So how does the Lord instruct us on this matter? Well, for that, we go to the Sermon on the Mount. If you have your Bible with you and you want to follow along, open up to Matthew chapter 5 and starting in verse 38. Jesus says, well, you have heard it said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. You probably was taught that verse when you were really young, just so that you would not get into a street fight or get into all kinds of altercations with your friends. And that we learn this as an early value and principle in our lives. But Jesus is saying, no, because of the way we live in our culture today, don't seek an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. Resist. Don't resist an evil person. Actually, assist the evil person. Let me say it again. Don't resist the evil person. Assist the evil person. You see, Jesus says when it comes to revenge, for those of us who follow him, it requires a different response. Revenge requires a different response. Jesus goes on in Matthew chapter 5, verse 40. And if anybody wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. We actually sang about this just a moment ago. Reflect back to the book of Genesis and the story of Joseph and his brothers. If you're familiar with the story, you probably could follow along easily, but for those who might be a little cloudy on the idea, Joseph was the son of Jacob. Basically, there was him and 11 other brothers, and Joseph had this gift of seeing visions and dreams, and so he went to his brothers and said, hey, I had a dream, and there's going to be a day when you're all going to bow down to me. And his brothers didn't think that was very nice. So they plotted against Joseph because he was Dad's favorite, and basically said, "Let's go kill him." So they went out, dug a big hole, and they threw him in the hole, thinking like he'll just die there, he'll just rot there. And then they got kind of guilty about it. So they like, let's get Joseph. Let's just sell him off to a bunch of slave traders. Joseph gets sold to Egypt, and he's there. He gets unfairly treated. And he's put in jail for a number of times, and he does his dream thing there. And then after that, he gets out, and he's able to actually interpret a dream for the king in Egypt, for Pharaoh. And such a profound understanding, this dream, that basically the king said, you're going to be in charge of all of Egypt. You're my second in command. You're going to manage my affairs. So astute was he that he went to the king and said, by the way, I had this vision that there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And so Joseph basically prepared for that famine. And when that famine occurred, the people in Palestine heard that there was grain in Egypt. And so Jacob sent his sons into Egypt to get some grain. And when they're standing there bowing to Joseph, wanting to get grain, the dream was fulfilled. Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of know my heart, and I'm confessing that I'm not proud of this, but if those are my brothers who sold me off into slavery, wanted to kill me, were now begging for grain, I would have become the grain Nazi. No grain for you. And I would have taken pleasure in that. And I think you would too. That was such an easy lob to get revenge. But what does Joseph do? He forgives his brothers. And he weeps over them. And he's grateful to be reunited with his family. And he says this, what you meant for evil, God is using for good. You see, revenge has a different response, and that response is forgiveness. Forgiveness. Jesus goes on to say resentment has a different response. Not only revenge having a different response, but resentment has a different response. Continuing on in verse 43. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. I don't know about you, but my natural response is not to love my enemy. It is a discipline that we need to work on each and every day, but it is the command of Christ. When Jesus says, "Love your neighbor and hate your," that's what the common people say. But I'm telling you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That passage in Romans 12 that we read just a moment ago, Paul actually echoes this very thing in verse 14 in chapter 12. He basically says, "Pray for those who persecute you, bless those who curse you." Pray for those who persecute you, bless those who curse you. And remember, he's like, do not take vengeance. That's God's work. And then he follows up in verse 20 in Romans chapter 12. He says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Wait, where is that? By doing this, you're going to heap burning coals on your enemy's head? What does that mean? Well, I think we probably have all read that in some way or another. Maybe you've heard that. And your response is, man, that must be like you're making your enemy a hothead. You're really like getting under his skin. You're like doing something. Oh, you're sticking it to the man. No, that's not what's happening at all in this passage. To understand, we have to know the culture of the day. You see, in the culture of the day, people didn't have running water or wolf stoves in their homes. They had a little clay, like earthen oven that was really kind of tiny. It was just big enough to bake bread. And they didn't have gas where they just turned it on. What they had was this giant fire pit in the middle of the village. And you would have to go out and get burning coals in the same way you would have to go out and draw water from a well. This was a common practice in that time because they didn't have the technology that we all get to experience today. So here's this village. It's kind of built in kind of a square where have all these homes around, and in the center is the kind of the hub of the community. And so it was common to take a big clay pot and put it on your head and walk out to the center of the village and take the pot, put it on the ground, scoop the coals that are already been burning and prepared for dinner, everybody's dinner, and put it in the pot, pick it up, put it on your head, and walk back to your little home. And what Paul is saying, and actually the writer of Proverbs uses this verse too, is he's basically saying, when you do that, you're allowing someone to not have to take that heavy pot off their head. You're just allowing them just to kneel at the fire pit, and then you do a nice thing to them by putting the coals on their head so that all they have to do is just stand up and walk back home. That's what this passage means. That's why in the context of the entire passage, by doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not overcome evil, but overcome evil with good. Let me say it again. Paul is saying, do not overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. When we are confronted with somebody who wants to hurt us, harm us, destroy us, our response is not to hurt, harm, or destroy back. It is to actually do good. That's why, because when it comes to resentment, it requires a different response. That response is goodness. That response is goodness. While vengeance is a different response in forgiveness, resentment has a different response in goodness. Therefore, if we're looking at the idea of overcoming the aspect of revenge and changing it over to the action of vengeance to do something on behalf of another person who's been wronged, then we need to say vengeance, too, has a different response. Continuing on, Jesus says, He, your heavenly Father, causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Wait, hold on. What? God causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good? He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous? You know, we hear it said all the time that if God is such a loving God, why would he let bad things happen to good people? It's because he's a God of justice. He treats people fairly. This concept is known as common grace, that every image bearer of God, every human being gets a sense of God's grace at all times, in all ways, because every human is made in his image. Paul goes on to say in verse 45, Jesus, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Jesus says, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. If our desire is to bring justice on behalf of another, our tendency is to not treat everyone the same. That's what Jesus is saying here. Our tendency is to only love those who laugh alike, walk alike, and those who even talk alike. You can lose your mind. Anybody pick up on what I just did there? Any Patty Duke show fans? Okay, forget it. You guys completely clueless on that one. That was a show I watched when I was growing up in the 60s. Wow. We tend to embody the birds of a feather flock together mindset. There's a problem with that, though. There's a man named Charles. He was, this is many years ago. He worked at a factory in Manchester, England, and he had the most important job at the factory. He was supposed to set the whistle for the start of the workday and the end of the workday. And he knew this was really an important job, so he took this seriously, and he would have to set the clock at the factory that would allow the whistle to go off at start of the day and at the end of the day. And so as he walked to the factory, he would stop by this clock shop. And in the window of the clock shop, there was this really expensive clock. And he thought, that clock, that's so expensive, it's got to be right. It's got to be accurate and on time. So he would set his watch to that clock in the window. And he would do this day in and day out and day in. And one day, the owner of the clock shop kind of stopped Charles and said, hey, I'm just kind of curious. What are you doing? He goes, oh, I'm using that clock to set the clock at the factory for the whistle. And the shop owner goes, well, that's pretty funny. He goes, I set that clock on the shop whistle. You see, when we compare ourselves to others, we could actually be doing ourselves more harm than good, because our standard should not be one another. Our standard should be set and expressed on the only one true God. And if vengeance has a different response, and we are all beneficiaries of common grace, then our response is fairness, because God is fair. For many of us here today, life has not been fair. And for some, life has not been good. And perhaps even for a few of you, you're struggling to forgive the abuser, that person who harmed you, hurt you, took something from you, or the accuser, the one who said things that were not true, made lies, besmirched your character. Or the wrongdoer, the one that was so selfish and inconsiderate that that person didn't care about how their actions were impacting you or anybody else. Life isn't typically fair. Life typically isn't good. And life doesn't often experience the level of forgiveness that would make us all so much better. But I will say this. For those who want to be a person to exercise justice on behalf of others, I would say, Chris Pratt, get out of the way. Scarlett Johansson, got no time for you, because there is one true avenger. The ultimate avenger is Jesus. Paul even said this, that we need to be aware that there are people in this world that want to do us harm. There are people in this world that are going to abuse us. There are people who are going to do us damage. And even to the church in Thessalonica, Paul addresses this, and he says that be careful. He's warning, let no man transgress and wrong his brother in this matter, because the Lord is an avenger in all of these things. Jesus will avenge. Vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord. I will repay. So how does he do that? Well, Jesus is really good at tit for tat. I mean, really good at this for that. That weakness that you have, recognize this is strength. For Jesus says that when you are weak, I am strong. That weight you carry, Jesus says, take this burden, for it is light, and I will give you rest. That sickness you feel, receive this healing, for I was lifted up. That shame that follows you, accept this forgiveness that I went to the cross for you. You all have that. There's something, and it's unfair. It was wrong. It was untrue. But whatever that is, Jesus offers this and so much more. It's not lost on me that this is Thanksgiving week, and I'm giving a message on revenge. But we're going to be going to a table in a few days with family and friends present. And at that table, there are going to be all kinds of personalities, all kinds of ideas, all types of behaviors and beliefs. And we are to be united at that table. If you've been watching and listening to the news, there's all kinds of reports about how Thanksgiving is going to be so hard. Does it have to be? Because the table that we go to has only been around for a few hundred years, and it was to celebrate the first harvest of the pilgrims in a new world where they received freedom to be able to start a new life. But that's a concept that's been around for centuries. Jesus started that tradition at a table with his disciples, where he shared a meal with them. And he said, listen, we're all wrongdoers. We all are abusers. And we have an accuser. He said, but there's something that's going to be different from here on out. Because this body of mine, I am going to be broken for you. I will take on the punishment that you deserve for the wrong that you have done. I'm going to give you the ultimate this for that. And that life that you live now that will end in death, I'm going to take your death and I'm going to pour it out by my blood. And because when you receive the gift of my blood, my shed blood for your life, for your eternal being with me, I'm giving you the ultimate this for that, your death for my life. In the next few moments, I'm going to ask you to come forward, receive the elements of communion, the bread, the cup, and know that here at PCC, we share an open table. That means if you are a Christ follower, you confess to Jesus, you are welcome. Whether you're a part of us or not, please come and enjoy. And if you are someone who's this morning heard this message and you realize, I know I'm a wrongdoer. I know I've done something that requires forgiveness, wants goodness, wants fairness. I want to have all those things. Then Jesus openly offers this to you. You can have that forgiveness. You can experience his goodness because God is fair and he wants you to have that. So all you have to do is just openly confess, I have been a wrongdoer. My heart has been wrong. And pray, Lord God, forgive me for all of that. Allow me to experience your goodness, and I will follow you. I will make you the Lord of my life. And you'll become part of this family, and you'll be able to share at this table. The elements of the communion, there's some gluten-free options inside the cap. The juice is it's non-alcoholic. We want everybody to come. If you're not able to come out of your seats, just raise your hand. Someone will come and bring the elements to you so that everybody here can participate. But I'm just going to say, in this moment, it is a privilege to share this meal with you. Because Jesus said, for as long as you eat this bread and you drink this cup, you remember me until my coming. This has been the gift given to the church since the days of Jesus as the church was established. And we continue in that tradition. So, and we're going to be singing this incredible song that we've been singing for many decades, Give Thanks. And as we do, please come to the table. Let us enjoy this together, this meal that Christ has given to us.